Hi there, it's Paige with m.a.b.e.l, and today we're going to do some hand sewing. We're going to make a hand-sewn Komebukuro from my hand-sewn Komebukuro kits. Komebukuro, or Japanese rice pouches, were really popular in the late Meiji and Taisho eras, which was like the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were these pouches that were used to bring rice and beans or other dried goods to temples and shrines as offerings. And they were made from scraps. They were made from household textiles and just sewn together with that running stitch, the sashiko stitch, to create just a really utilitarian pouch. With that in mind, and in the spirit of mottainai, which in Japanese means not being wasteful, I developed this Komebukuro kit, and it includes some scraps, and of course you can continue to embellish with your own. So let me show you what's in the kit, so you will end up with a square Komebukuro similar to this. So my Komebukuro kit come with 4 panels of a dark blue canvas, and you are going to get a piece of quilt scrap for the bottom. You are going to get 5 pieces of lining fabric. You will get some sashiko thread and some sashiko needles. You will get 4 pieces of fabric to make the channeling, and then I include a variety of scraps. I include some vintage antique indigo fabrics from Japan. I picked these up on my last trip there. You are going to get some hexes. These were English paper pieced. They were all prepped to make a quilt way back in the 1920s or 1930s, but they never got made into a quilt. You'll get some scrap fabric. Right now, the pouch kits include these pieced grandmother's flower garden flowers. Again, they were never completed and made into a quilt. And then you'll get some quilt scraps as well. The Komebukuro, though, is a perfect vehicle for using your own scraps and precious little pieces of fabric that you may have. So in my Komebukuro today, I've got some Liberty of London that I just had these tiny little pieces, and I'm going to be including that as well. So please go through your stash bin and pull out any scraps that you might have, because this is the perfect project for that. What's not included is you will need some scissors, you will need some fabric snips, you might want a seam ripper, you'll need all-purpose sewing thread. I include 2 sashiko needles, and you can sew your bag together with the sashiko needles and the sashiko thread, but if you prefer to use the all-purpose thread, then you're going to need a regular hand sewing needle as well. Your kit also comes with the cording to cinch your bag shut. Another thing that might be helpful is a marking pen or chalk pencil or something to mark your seam allowances. So let's start sewing. For this project, we're going to create the outer cube first, and then we create the lining cube, and then we put them all together. So for that reason, I recommend embellishing and sewing on the sides before we create the shape of the bag. It just makes it a little bit easier when everything is flat. That being said, you are more than welcome to do your embellishing after you sew together the entire bag. That is personal preference and however you like to do it. For the sake of this video, we're going to be doing the embellishing first and then creating the cubes, as you'll see in some video I took from a class I taught earlier this month. Today we're at Forever Yarn, which is in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and I am teaching a Sew Your Own Komebukuro class. We're going to be hand sewing, and I've got 10 students, and I've prepared kits that include all the pieces they need to make their very own Komebukuro. So stay tuned, and you'll be seeing more of this. So today we're going to be making Komebukuro, and Komebukuro are Japanese rice pouches, because traditionally women would sew a pouch and they used it to take. And I have some antique indigo fabric that I picked up in Japan. Isn't it beautiful? I gave you each Grandma Flower Garden that you can cut up. Like, I brought some seam rippers. You can take the hexagons off. These are pretty big, you know, it really sort of covers the whole thing. So you can totally cut what you want out of that. Another piece of antique quilt scrap, some sashiko thread. There is a sashiko needle and your cording also. I liked decorating them before putting the bag together just because you have some flexibility there. However, after the fact, you can still keep zhuzhing up your bag. You're just going to be going through all the layers. So we're going to lay out the pieces, and then you can start sewing. To start, you will take the bottom piece, which is the quilt piece, and one of the pieces of canvas. You will align them, and then you will sew using a running stitch or a back stitch. I have doubled the thread, and I do typically a running stitch, but every once in a while I'll reinforce it with a back stitch. Also, please note that I started stitching about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the two pieces, and I will stop also 1/4 of an inch away from the two pieces. When you get to the end, you can either backstitch or make a small knot, and look, you are ending about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric pieces. You will rethread your needle, open up what you've just sewn, and add your next piece of canvas to the quilt bottom, and repeat as you did with the first panel piece, again starting in about 1/4 of an inch from the side, and you're just going to stitch all the way to the end of the bottom fabric, again using running stitch or a back stitch. You will stitch until you're about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and again you will knot your thread, and you will repeat this process again with the next two panels. When you finish sewing your 4th panel, knot it and snip it. Open it all up, and you'll see that you'll have a giant plus sign. Now we're going to sew the sides. You'll align 2 of the canvas pieces, and you'll start sewing from the bottom to the top. And I start with the 1/4 inch in at the bottom, but I stitch all the way to the edge at the top. Of course, if you want to use pins or sewing clips to secure your fabric, that's perfectly welcome. The fabric I'm using has a little bit of texture to it. That's why I'm not using pins to align it. When you get to the top here, you can either backstitch or knot it, and then you'll repeat this process 3 more times. After sewing the 4th side seam, you will of course remember to knot your last stitch, and then we will turn the bag right side out. As you turn the bag right side out, use your fingers to poke out those corners. At this time, you can also use your fingers and finger press those seams to give the bag a nice square shape. At this point, we are going to hem the channeling fabric. So take the pieces of channeling fabric and turn the short end in about 1/4 of an inch, and just using a running stitch, you will hem that piece. You can use either your all-purpose thread or you can use your sashiko thread for this. When you get to the end, just make a simple little knot to secure it. Repeat on the other side and for the other 3 pieces. When you've finished the hemming on the second side, go ahead and knot it, fold it in half lengthwise, and place it in the middle of one side of your bag. With the channel fabric folded in half lengthwise, go ahead and baste it to the side of the bag. Basting is basically a super long running stitch. You're going to repeat this process for the next 3 sides. Once you've done this, your outer is complete. Now you'll take your canvas pieces, all 5 of them, and construct your lining. So right now I have my finished lining and my outer, and I am going to nest them together to sew along the perimeter. You want to nest these so they are right sides together. I nest them by matching the side seams and opening those seam allowances. I use pins or clips to keep these together. I start by matching all the side seams. I go around and make sure each of them match up with the seam allowance spread open. After the corners are matched up, I then look to see if the sides are fairly matched up. I make sure the cording tucks between the 2 layers nicely, and if there are any gaps, I use some pins to ease out any gaps. I am now going to sew around the perimeter of the bag. I use about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I start right before one of the channels on the left. I sew all the way around, but I stop right after that 4th channel so that I have about a 4-inch gap that I can use to turn the bag right side out. When you've gotten all the way around the bag, minus that 4-inch gap, knot your thread and snip. Now you're going to turn the bag inside out through that little gap. It takes a little bit of finagling, but you can do it. Go ahead and use your fingers to poke out the corners so they're nice and square. Then insert the lining back into the bag. Once the lining is in the bag, go around and finger press those seams, manipulate those seams so that the lining is on the lining side and the outer is on the outer side. Any loose threads you can either pull or snip to make sure everything is nice and neat. When you get to that 4-inch gap, you're going to fold down lining and the outer pieces, about that 1/4 inch seam allowance, fold them into each other, and then you're going to sew that shut. Once you've got that nice and neat, go ahead and take your pins and pin that closed so that you can sew accurately. You have a couple of options when you are sewing this gap closed. I am doing a really simple whip stitch. I'm hiding the knot between the lining and the outer, and I am just whip stitching it closed. You could also do a decorative sashiko running stitch around the perimeter of the bag from the lining side as well. When you get to the end, go ahead and knot and nest your thread and snip it, and voila, you have your komebukuro. All you need to do now is run your cording through the channel fabric. So there you have it, a completely hand-sewn komebukuro from my hand-sewing Komebukuro kit. And you can continue to embellish the exterior. Just be aware that your stitching will show on both the outside as well as the lining. I love how these cinch up, and they are the perfect canvas to show off and highlight all your favorite scraps. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and comment below and share pictures of the Komebukuro you've made. I love seeing the creativity that everybody puts into their makes. Thank you so much for watching.